Welcome to Sickcast, brought to you by Sikh Research Institute, illuminating every path.
Good evening and Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa. Let me at the onset say a couple of things. This is atypical of me what I'm about to do, because yesterday when I was flying into Toronto, I was thinking about what I have observed within this month in Canada. And I'm like, and I'm going back to Pamela. What should I really be talking about? Should I do impromptu conversations involving punk and other things? Or is there more? So we are back here at Bama. You know the theme this year is 1984, Path of the Warrior Saints. So just as a reminder, Warrior Saints. And it is 2024. I don't know if you do Google search today or if you check any news item, what's on the news. So what's the context of that also as we are here? The Canadian context is that there are two themes in Canada this month. April is a Sikh Heritage Month and a Sikh Heritage Month, as well as Genocide Remembrance, Condemnation, and Prevention. We are at the intersection of those two things in April. And we can keep talking about the past, but maybe we need to get into the current one. So I told the organizers, I shared with them this morning, that I think I'm going to do a more prepared talk, because I need to quote certain things as to what Canada Heritage website is saying today, what the last 26 days I have observed about Canadian politicians are saying, and make them intersect with Sikh heritage or the heritage part and the genocide, because it is about remembrance, but the other two words are also important. There's a condemnation attached to that and prevention. So that's where I'm going with this today. So allow me to sort of deep dive into those two elements. So this morning when I really started writing some thoughts, I looked at the Hukum as my morning ritual from Sri Harinder Singh, and Guru Nanak spoke on this. And Guru Nanak Sahib in the Nasri Rag this morning in the outline, in a very long 8 stanzas said, Kya bapada chapdi na hai, kichad duba mail na jaye. This is saying, the poor crane, literally, is taking bath in a small pool, but is sinking in the mud. There is no way there can be any cleansing of the filth, because you are in a small pool and you're getting stuck and do bad, you're actually sinking in the mud. So what is a small pool? If Punjab to aaye, you would know this, what a chapdi is. Chapdi is not a pleasant thing. What are my chapdis and how am I being like a crane? In today's context, I start thinking like that. What am I going to say this evening now? So I have to put my notes on the side again. Our small pools are our organizations, our jathebandis, our political parties, our isms and our ologies. That's our chapdi these days. The crane's behavior is chalaki. Crane wants to come across as a swan, but behaviorally it's not a swan. So I'm like, wow. This is the Guru Nanak who also started the Sikh heritage. This is the Guru Nanak who also recorded for the first time in the history of South Asia, documented 4 summits on genocide he witnessed. So I gotta take it much more seriously than what my own opinions are. So I'm like, okay. Then I went on and I read on to the current federal ministers, what they have said about these two declarations. And it's very interesting. They said more about Sikh heritage than genocide. Let's start with Sikh Heritage Month. You already know it's a month-long celebration. It's highlighting many contributions that Sikhs have made to Canada. I think we number almost 1 million now. 2-year-old data says we have passed 750,000, but that's the official data. And we have been here, we being the Sikhs, since the late 19th century. So I think we have to realize we have almost 150-year journey here. That's a very long time to start talking about some real things rather than ceremonial things. We have made incredible contributions ever since, but what has happened individually, Sikhs are being highlighted in Canada. And they are receiving some accolades as well, but that's individually. But how are, and these are the words used by the Canadian ministers in the last 3 years. And my question, I'm paraphrasing that, but how are the history, culture, and traditions of Sikhs in Canada, how are they being celebrated? The Sikh values of service and compassion are constantly being told and used by them. Constantly. They're getting acknowledged, which means they're getting acknowledged not in the political speeches, but by the officials who are in the ruling party or the opposition parties. But their presence, the presence of these values in the programs and funding is merely seen as ceremonial. I know recently one grant was given for $5 million, but do you see any other funding on value and compassion? That's a question and we've seen this even this month. In all of the Sakhi conversations going on, there's no conversation about any policy. How are you going to bring this Sikh paradigm into the Canadian Sikh experience and for Canadian experience? So why are the countless achievements of Sikhs in politics, in business, and you all know the accolades people have in these areas. Sciences, sports, it's beginning to happen there, arts, medicine, and education, but they're not transforming into just and fair policies in those very fields. Even in those fields, we are not getting those conversations about what does it mean to add Sikh angle to that. Okay, so the reminder, Sikhi starts with Eko Onkar. And Eko Onkar is the one creative and pervasive force, which is the one force. That means, simply put, the unity of all human beings. Well, it also means zero inequity and inequality. So basically, equality and equity is needed. I think those are very human conditions we are dealing in Canada as well. That's what's needed in programs and policies. Equity and equality. But you're not seeing that at all. We are finally starting to make some noise about that. The Sakhi is constantly celebrated as something spiritual and a festival. Even wrongly so, and then corrected even in BC last week, if you notice. Okay? But it is not just that. That's not the Sikh thing. It is very much a harvesting festival, yes, it is. It is a harvesting festival for Punjabis, both Indian and Pakistani Punjabis. But when it comes to the Sikhs, the Guru Sahibs revealed, or rather elevated the Sakhi to renew personal commitment. If we look at the word Sakhi in Guru Granth Sahib, first time Guru Nanak uses, it says the Sakhi becomes great Sabad Srut Manvana. When the wisdom in the Shabad is accepted by the Surat, our consciousness. That's how the mindfulness happens in Sikhi. Second time it's invoked by Guru. He says the Sakhi becomes beautiful, just Santapeta when we submit ourselves to truth examples, people who live the truth, not the ones who talk about it in political campaigns. So this is what Sakhi was, about renewing your commitment to end the separation. In Sikh parlance, individually, we are ending separations from the divine, from the one force. Collectively, it's a separation we are ending at a community level from each other. To end it in community and the world, The Khalsa, the sovereign ones, were inaugurated in 1699 by Guru Gobind Singh. So that when something enters your consciousness, when something enters your behavior, remember Crane's behavior is altered now? Only then can you bring it that here is a group of people who believe in this. They are the sovereign ones. They become basically love-born full-time revolutionaries. That's the Khalsa. Canada needs to understand that element. We cannot just make it about spirituality and harvesting every year. And if they understand these sovereign elements of the Khalsa, maybe we can go to some programming and policies. So, on the heritage part, I guess the overall question I have is, are the Canadian local and national governments, and those of you who work with them, are they committing to really breaking down the systematic barriers faced by the Sikhs and also by all racialized communities? Because the data there tells a very different story in the structured form of racism. Okay, now to the genocide, remembrance, condemnation, and prevention. Prevention starts with remembering. That's what the heritage side of Canada says. But we struggle, the Canada struggles when Sikhs like to remember their genocide. It actually says honoring the memory, resilience, and courage of both the victims of genocide and their descendants, who carry the weight of intergenerational trauma. Well, since 84, we have had 2 generations too now. We have people who are doing displays in this exhibition who were born after 1984. So this is the first attempt in a public space to do that, right? We do it individually, but now doing it at museums. Now let's come back to what's happening at Canadian level again. Are we listening to the stories of genocide survivors and their descendants? I would say no. And to really understand the devastating impacts of these crimes, which the Indian courts have now called crimes against humanity, are Canadian governments and political parties listening to those stories and those voices? It is not enough to just repeat, and you hear this a lot, I'm hearing this week in the context of globally what's happening with genocides, that these atrocities shall never happen again. How many times have we heard that? Every politician repeats this. Every time they see a horrible crime, especially the tragic end of lives. But they are happening again. I went on Genocide Watch website at 10:30 a.m. today, and it lists 17 genocide emergencies today. Genocide emergencies or warnings. 17 of them on the globe today. So those who are not members of the UN, for example, they have no moral responsibility to end genocides. But Canada is. Where is Canada intervening to end genocide? There are 17 of them going on today. Sikh genocide is not going on today in Canada, but others are. So Canada has been, so let's talk about some politics here. Canada has been home to thousands of genocide survivors and their descendants, including Sikhs. Percentage-wise, Canada now has the largest Sikh population in the world, 2.1%. In India, it's 1.7%. So if not in Canada, where else will we talk about this? This is the place to talk about this. This is where we have the largest share of our population, including the survivors and their descendants, which the Canadian heritage site admits, according to the Canadian government, this is the place to do it. So we are also going to do it here. We have every right to do it here. Yes, they have rebuilt their lives in Canada, but have their wounds healed? No. Our wounds haven't been healed. Canadians at times do exemplify what we call empathy, kindness, and courage. These do help counter hate and prejudice and racism and xenophobia. But however, we must question the government. Is it really, and I'll give you the quote because it's from the direct website, Is the government, is it really steadfast in its commitment to combat hatred and discrimination in all their forms? How are they seeking Sikh input on the Canadian anti-racism strategy, which they keep hounding about every time? And Canada's first ever action plan on combating hate. I haven't seen any Sikh input on that yet. I don't know if anyone of you have seen it. So if they're serious about it, then you can see where it puts some of this. Remembering the darkest chapters of human history includes highlighting advocates for justice as well. You heard about this one, Sikh Parada, and there are many others. There's a Canadian angle to all of these. Otherwise, building a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive, this is the DEI we are used to for corporate world now. If everyone is invoking DEI everywhere, yes, we can build a more DEI community, but it will be reduced to a corporate hogwash and identity representation as it is clearly happening, and we are witnessing it in New York City this week. Why do I say that? Because Sikhs are going through that. You know, we always say this is what happened to Sikh politicians in India. But what about Sikh politicians in Canada? And the reason I bring this is happening in New York City in front of us. University, Columbia University in New York City. The president is an Arab American woman. The mayor of New York City is an African American man. The police chief of New York City is an African American man. So what is happening there? The students protest in Gaza, the genocide in Gaza, they're dealt with the brute force. So just because you rise to the top in individual accolade doesn't mean that you'll be able to do something structurally. We're witnessing this at the very highest levels at Columbia University right now. So let us take a moment to remember the 1984 genocide in India and all genocides globally. That's what Guru Nanak was doing. If we want to celebrate the heritage or commemorate it from that angle, but including the ones on the Canadian soil, which I know are getting more and more acknowledged. But let us also honor the courage and resilience of all survivors and their advocates for justice, as well as those who participated in the resistance. This is very important because if we do not acknowledge the people who are in resistance, then we will remain the victims. People do respond to fighting the genocides, but their stories generally are not told. I think this exhibition, there was an attempt to tell an angle of that at least. So let us also acknowledge that we are currently not preventing any genocide. We are not. It's just a declaration on a website and a month where it's being talked about. There's nothing happening to prevent 17 genocides happening currently in the globe, on the globe. So acts of genocides begin with what? They begin with targeting and dehumanizing groups of people. Current events globally are calling us to be vigilant and stand against prejudice, hate, racism, casteism, and discrimination that are leading to the tragic loss of life, yes, but what are the root causes? Those are just the words. What are the root causes that lead to these unspeakable acts of violence? And in the courts again, I will do with my power, I will do everything in my power. Have you heard that? I've been hearing it since my teenage years, when I know Reagan said this. Actually, the only, if it is not clear, the only global leader on the record to speak against 1984 Sikh genocide was Pope John Paul II, no one else. That should tell us that nobody is really even ready 40 years later to speak about it. The Indian political climate is speaking about it, including the very man who is accused of committing a genocide in Gujarat in the last election cycle in Hoshiarpur. The current Prime Minister Modi, he stood there in Hoshiarpur rally. Just so you know, and he said to answer Congress. So this is their game. This is not about acknowledging Sikhs. Because Congress had said, Jo hua so hua. And he answered that by saying, no. Jo hua so hua nahi. Jo hua bahut galat hua. Jada galat hua. Genocide hua. But that's their game. In our game, no global leader is doing this. Only Pope John Paul II had done that. So, if I will do everything in my power, you keep hearing this, and I have heard this, and politicians have said this umpteenth time. By spiritual people I've heard this, political people I've heard saying this. I hear this all the time when there's a gun violence in America. Let us pray. No, that is not Sikh society. Sikh society is not to do what we today say, let's do Simran or let's do Akhand Path. When there was a genocide, at minimum, we spoke against it. At maximum, we went and fought all the way with them, including with resistance. We must understand that's our response. And we did this, unless we do this, if we reduce everything to, I will do everything in my power, but actually don't do it, then genocides will continue as they are continuing. If Sikhs themselves were really sovereign, when we stopped other genocides. But we are not sovereign because that's why we also become targets of genocide. So what can we do? Well, the Sikh heritage and the Sikh genocide really are two sides of the same coin for us. I don't know if I'll make a little bit of a case for it before I end. This, by the way, was embossed in Sikh society. It today is also embossed in Sikh society if you understand Sikh heritage. Why do I say that? Because Sikh heritage is to fight for everyone's sovereignty. That's what we meant. That's why we were targets of genocidal campaigns. And even if it means that multiple genocidal campaigns against us happen, because we assert our own Sikh sovereignty as well. Now, this was the case in 18th century. This was also the case in 20th century. And we, in Sikh terminology, call them Karlukaras. Karlukaras include people who fight back, not just the people who were killed by the empire or the state. That's our term. That's the 18th century term. So in these dystopian moments, in the April of 24, I can just ask us to consider certain things, and those of you who work with governments, maybe you can do something about it. Let us seriously commit to actually protecting the fundamental rights. Otherwise, fundamental human rights and dignity of everyone. Let the governments and international agencies commit to intervene in genocides and accept the principles to combat transnational repression. If you have not heard those, Google those. Governments are not accepting those principles, so we can make all the noise we want. Until the governments accept those principles, they will not work to stop the transnational repression. To end, I ask all of you, in your personal capacities now, please renew your own commitment to become an agent of justice. And if you're not able to, which is understandable, many of us are not able to do that, then at least become their advocates or supporters, those who do that. That would be a non-ceremonial celebration of Sikh heritage. Because in Sikhi, the Creator, through its creation, through us, administers complete justice. We don't wait for someone else to do complete justice. The Kartar within us has to come out. Pura mein aap kare Kartar. And that is also a real commemoration of Genocide Remembrance, Condemnation and Prevention. I ended with the same hukum I heard this morning. And the line which affected me was, how do I change my own behavior then? Well, I changed my behavior. There was a line in there that said, Gurmukh Bhagat Sahaj Vichar. Gurmukh is not a noun in more than 90% of the time in the Granth Sahib. Khakha has a sehari on it, those of you studying from linguistically. It means how you become guru-oriented, which means how you change your behavior from that train who's still getting muddied in its own small pool. It says you do it by doing what? Devotion, bhakti. And sahaj vichari, when you are naturally, habitually reflecting. So if we bring devotion within us, as those who follow the Sikh practices, we bring a natural reflection within us, we become guru-centered, and this is how we'll be able to become either agents of justice supporters of those who are doing that. May we all feel the one grace, and good night, and Vaikushika Khalsa.
You were listening to Sikh Cast by Sikh Research Institute, illuminating every path.